Welcome back. Thank you so much for being here with us in this afternoon. This afternoon will be all about inclusion because the name of the game is how to make inclusion inclusive. And diversity is diverse. The time of diversity and inclusion is here to stay. For the next 10 years, that's going to be the name of the game. So we have to understand that we as Latinos have probably not benefited enough from this diversity and inclusion revolution, but we ourselves have to understand how to be more inclusive about our diversity. We are 19% of the population, 62 million people, and counting. We come from 26 different countries of origin. 21 of them are Spanish speakers. Yes, 1 in every 3 African American is Latino. That makes 14.4 million Latinos, Afro-Latinos. 1 in every 4 Hispanic identifies as Native American or Indigenous, and more than 22% of our community identifies as LGBTQ. So our diversity is deep and it is very complex. And a lot of people ask me, so what term do I use? Do I use Hispanic, Latino, Latinx? So let's start there, so that everybody has a comfort in navigating and using whatever you feel comfortable with. Hispanic refers to España, Spain, or the language. Latino refers to the geography of Latin America. Latinx is a gender-neutral term invented, but in reality is that only 3% of the Hispanic community even knows that those labels exist. So pretty much we don't care. As much as, as long as you pay us well and respect us, we're fine with whatever you want. Those 3% of the people that do know about the labels and do care about using them, absolutely welcome, absolutely free. But let's not forget, labels can be distracting, can be confusing. It's not about the label that you use, it's about the meaning that we give to the Hispanic community, so that when we hear Latinos, what we hear is growth, progress, future, diverse. So let's enjoy our identities. Let's actually be curious about who we are. And let's start this afternoon with an open mind so that we can learn how diverse and how great our community is. Now, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce to you one of my role models, and I am sure one of the incredible heroes of all the community, Secretary Henry Cisneros. Welcome. It's an honor to have you with us.
I am proud to have been asked to be a co-chair of the Hispanic Leadership Summit for a 4th year. It's an amazing gathering of Latino leaders from across the country, and to do this 4 years in a row when we are confronting the challenges of the pandemic and other restrictions in the country is impressive indeed. We all owe an immense debt of gratitude to Claudia Romo Edelman, for the leadership that she has shown in this endeavor, bringing us together in this way, setting forth a work agenda, thinking through imaginatively ways to create differentiation between this and other conferences of its type across the country. Very well done. And I am very proud to be associated with all of you in this room. What an amazing gathering of Latino leaders from everywhere across America to find common cause, to find agreement on key agendas of business, of legislative leadership, of social action. We live in a time of great opportunities, to be sure, and we're all blessed to be part of the American Latino community. I've said before, I will say it forever. One of America's great blessings is the presence of American Latinos who bring such energy and ambition and hope for the future. A future backbone of American progress, in my opinion. But it is also, we know, a time of great challenge and difficulty. The pandemic has made it clear the fault lines in American society, and unfortunately, many Latinos have found themselves on the wrong side of that fault line. We've had too many people in the essential jobs that expose them to the illness. We have found too many people who have been sick with long-term pandemic results, or far too many who have died. And we see the effects in the economic inequality, we see the effects in educational underattainment in so many areas where the American Latino community needs to make immense progress, and where the country's interest is served if we make that progress. I think it's a very important thing that people would gather this way, you would gather this way, leaders would gather this way, to think through the challenges of the future. I'm pleased that over these days, you've discussed subjects related to economic progress, economic development, jobs, incomes, corporate, rising on the corporate ladder, corporate boards, all of those things that will add to our ability to influence our economic destiny. We've also focused on education, very importantly. Everything from pre-K through K through 12, through accession to college, community colleges, higher education, graduate school, law school, professional endeavors, critically important to our place in the future of this country. And we have focused very importantly as well on the need to come together across our differences. If Latinos, who are now approaching 60 million people in the United States and the fastest growing minority as we know, and will account for about half of all the growth in the United States between now and 2040, if we were to remain just a mix of disconnected, isolated, not integrated nationalities and allegiances, some of us Mexicanos, some of them Cubanos, some Puerto Ricanos, some from Latin America, some from the Caribbean, and other groups from around the compass. With our differences of religion, with our differences of politics, with our differences of geography, if that's all we are, then 60 million is a meaningless number. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a kind of a statistical aberration. If we remain that way, then we will never be a concentrated force in key states or a concentrated force in key industries. But if we can find the common ground, the common themes, put some of our differences aside and focus on the things that we can agree upon, and there are many, the vast majority of things related to our children's education, how we treat our elderly, how we develop our small businesses, how we support the ambitions of those who have the capabilities to rise in the professions and corporations, how we create scientists from among our midst, how we advance our military leaders. If we support each other in every aspect of American life, then 60 million is one of the most important forces in the American story of the next decades. If we can support each other and find that common ground, put those differences aside and concentrate on the things that unite us and create a block around those things that unite us and get excited about that and go forward under the guise of the Hispanic star, then we will be one of the most important forces in shaping the destiny of our country. And let me just tell you, America needs the energy and drive of the American Latino community. It does, it really does. America needs to stay young, to stay energetic, to stay forward-looking, to stay ambitious, to stay capable, to stay excited about education and building for the future. We've always been a forward-looking people, America. And the time calls for that same energy, and in this generation, in this time, it takes the form of the American Latino community united, 60 million strong, various groups coming together, spanning the geography of the nation, representation in both political parties, representation in every form of civic, religious, and other endeavor in the American society. That's why this meeting is important. And that's why your presence here means so much. I'm proud to be associated with Claudia and the leadership team she's assembled in order to just bring this message. We will work together and we will assure the greatness of our country going forward. I say our country. It is our country as much as anyone else's. Whether some care to recognize it or not, whether some choose to marginalize us or not, whether some choose to denigrate our heritage or history or language or any other aspect, our last names, whatever it might be, our color of our skin, whatever it might be that is a divisor in America, this is our country too. And we're going to give it our very best. And in due course, America will recognize one of the best chapters of its history is the chapter in which the American Latino community, led by people like you, comes to lead the nation as a whole. That's what our future is, that's what our destiny is, and that's what we will do. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for letting me be part of it.
Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to greet you at the 2021 Hispanic Leadership Summit. It is truly unfortunate that we cannot meet in person this year at the United Nations headquarters, but I do hope that we can gather together during next year's summit. You are convening at a critical moment. We now have less than 10 years to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and we are nearly 2 years into the global health, economic, psychological, and social crises caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. This is why it is so important to have each and every one of us involved in finding and implementing solutions, both globally and also nationally, as well as locally. We need everyone to play their part to achieve the goals and build a better world, to recover better from this horrible pandemic. The Hispanic community in the United States is both massive and also diverse. There are more than 60 million people by latest estimates. Your influence and reach go well beyond U.S. borders and deep into Latin America. Whether you are leaders in the Hispanic community or whether you are allies to us and our goals, you have the power to influence, to move people, and to inspire action. From fighting poverty to ending hunger, from striving for gender equality to reducing inequalities and ensuring decent jobs, you, indeed, all of us together, can contribute meaningfully to reaching the global goals. We count on your commitment to make a difference, both within your communities and beyond. I hope that the conversations that you have in this important summit offer insights and ideas on how we can achieve the global goals together. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us. It is an honor for me to be able to actually have this conversation with Professor Jeffrey Sachs, President of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, Director of the Center of Sustainable Development at Columbia University, UN Sustainable Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and Center for Sustainable Development. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, you're an eminence. It's a pleasure to have you here at the Hispanic Leadership Summit.
Look, the honor is completely mine, and I'm absolutely delighted to be with you at this summit, which is so important. So it's very exciting for me, and greetings to everybody that's participating.
Today, we're here to launch actually an upgrade, if you want, of that tool. I'm very proud that SDSN, the network that you lead, was partnering with the World Human Foundation to deliver what we're going to be announcing today. So please, if you don't mind, talk about this tool, what it means, some highlights.
So we're developing a set of tools together, you and I and your great leadership and our SDSN colleagues, that will be a toolkit to help track progress around the country in the Hispanic community and in different communities as well, because this should be a tool for Hispanic leaders to say, hey, you know what? All of our kids are supposed to be in school. We're supposed to be enabling our children to go get a college degree, because you know how important that is in the 21st century economy. That's going to be key to decent jobs. And we can't have it, as was true in the past, that the college going was limited to children of affluent families, in the United States. If your parents went to university, there's a good chance you will, because you're growing up in upper middle class in a comfortable environment. They can pay for you, or so forth. But if you're growing up in a poor household, first in the family, that's hard. And especially the US has made it very, very hard, because tuitions are very expensive. And unlike other countries, we don't have the government support to lower or eliminate the cost of tuition, and we should. And that is part of our mission at SDSN, is to identify the public policies that could really make a difference. One thing I can tell you is that when you get the data, which we will be delivering an ongoing basis on updating and refining and responding to questions and learning from the data, then the idea is translate that into policies. So I think every city should have a sustainable development goals dashboard and plan.
And Professor Sachs, why don't we just like unveil right now, so that all our audience can see the dashboard of the H, as we call it, the H SDGs, the Hispanic SDGs. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to read out from the report of the 32 indicators that were compared relatively to the SDG delivery. The Hispanic community was most likely to be the racial group least well served by any state relative to the white community in access to early education, those not seeing a doctor due to cost, and a percentage of children in poverty. Hispanic women have the largest pay gap according to the research that we did, and we're launching for all of you today with Professor Sachs and SDSN. In 2019, Hispanic people made up only 3% of elected officials in the US, despite making up 18% of the population. And one of the biggest findings of all areas is that we don't have racially disaggregated data for including in food security, maternal mortality, and lead in the drinking water. Professor Sachs, giving those data points that we found in this dashboard that we did together, what's your analysis?
Well, my analysis is that we have some real opportunities for progress in the Hispanic community. And I want to put my finger on one of them, where you said that only 3% of elected officials are Hispanic, but the Hispanic population is 18% of the population in the United States. By the way, half the growth of the American population between 2010 and 2020. And the vast majority are citizens, of course, and go out and run for office. I want to vote for you. That's my message, because we need your voice, your leadership, your guidance, and the more representation, the more our great diversity in this country will be well represented, and we will not leave.
Professor Sachs, I do want to ask you a couple of more questions, if you don't mind. So we're very embedded in racial, like the world has woken up on racial justice. A lot of action has been taken. A lot of action needs to be taken. How, if you're a company, if you're a government, how do you embed, what is the overlap of diversity and inclusion and sustainability and purpose? And how do we make it easy for people to be able to embrace diversity and inclusion while keeping sustainability at the same time? What are the overlap areas, and what do you think you should take, like we should say to CEOs of companies that are trying to do the right thing?
I believe that diversity in the workplace is a huge value for recruitment and retention of the most talented people. And environmental sustainability, it's not an accident that those go together.
Right.
Actually, social inclusion will lead to better environmental management, and environmental justice will be part of the transformation to a safer, greener, more sustainable society.
I have another question. Like in a way, how do you see Latinos contributing to the progress of America?
As individuals, to any family, and to Hispanic families, certainly, along with every family, I would say, just do the best you can for your children, for their health care, their nutrition, their education, their safe environment for growing up, and so that they can really blossom and gain the health and the sense of security and well-being, the sense of solidarity with other children and with society, and of course, the scholastic skills and the knowledge that they will need for good jobs in the future. This is the most important investment conceivable for a society, is investing in its children.
Well, thank you so much. After this session, we're going to lead into the sessions talking about our agenda. Better health, better education, better jobs, better gender equality, very focused on solutions. We call that the agenda of progress, because all what Latinos want and what really unites us, Professor Sachs, is our desire to progress. The problem is that the higher we go, the lonelier it gets. And that's why it's important to gather people to see how do we push the agenda together. Any final words, any advice on a group of leaders that are gathered today discussing how do we actually, what are the solutions and who are the players on those areas?
Thank you for your vision. Thank you for promoting the Hispanic leadership. And please, with SDSN, this is not only a report. It's not only, if I could put it that way, a dashboard or a set of tools. It's a partnership. And it's a partnership for future years, future meetings. Next time, I won't be halfway around the world when the meeting's taking place, so I'll be with you in person. But we're going to work on this together, and we're going to see that the Sustainable Development Goals provide a lot of leverage, a lot of guidance, a lot of good ideas, and a great direction for building the future that we want. So I really thank you for the partnership, and I look forward to all of our continued efforts together.
Thank you so very much, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, President of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network and Director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, co-chair of Hispanic Leadership Summit. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you so much for the partnership with SDSN and the launch of this incredible new tool dashboard that we will make sure gets into the hands of every Hispanic leader.
Fantastic. Wonderful.
Welcome to the annual Latino Summit in New York City. I'd like to start out first and foremost by thanking Claudia Edelman for being a trailblazer in the Latinx community across the globe. Her work is shaping private companies across the US and setting a standard for diversity and inclusion. And I am honored to call her a friend. My name is Wendy Garcia, and I am New York City's Chief Diversity Officer at the Office of the New York City Comptroller. And I am so excited to join you over video. I oversee everything from contracts to investments and ask the hard questions on who are we doing business with, and more importantly, why. I work with our $260 billion pension fund and 18 different bureaus to create regulations, policies, compliance measures to put equity at the center of the city. And I grade city agencies on how they're doing with women and minority-owned businesses. As you can imagine, this is not easy work because my job is to level the playing field and set standards where in many cases, standards do not exist. All to make sure that we are representing the 80% of women and people of color in New York City. As COVID-19 pandemic ravaged our nation and our economy, women and communities of color were especially hard hit by unemployment and business shutdowns. We also saw stirrings of one of the largest social justice movements in the United States history, rightfully forcing public and private sectors to take a step and acknowledge and confront systemic racism. But make no mistake, we have work to do. New York City has a $30 billion spend, and only 3.8% this year went to people of color. And Hispanic businesses alone received less than 1% of COVID spending during the city's first pandemic year. That is why more than ever, this conference is so critical and a critical opportunity to take stock, to see what's working and what isn't. So today I encourage all of you to use your influence, to use your power, your knowledge, to put equity at the forefront of everything you do, and call on the US to do the following. Call on corporate companies across the world and municipalities across the nation to hire chief diversity officers at executive level roles and place diversity right at the top. With less than 1% of Latinos sitting on boards across the country, we must mandate that Fortune 500 companies and public municipalities create transparency plans on how they will grow their representation among the Latinx community. And we must put our money where our mouth is and invest in growing Latino wealth, providing capital for business owners, investing in education and the health of our Latino communities. Today's dialogue is more than just talk. It provides a shared sense of purpose and a mutual foundation, the one that we need to walk in this critical work. So gracias, have a great conference, and remember que nosotros importamos.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to an incredible session. I'm Carolyn Rods, and I'm here with the amazing founder of Wikipedia, Jimmy Wales. We're going to dig in today a little bit on how we can help elevate the voices of Hispanic stars like all of you, and what it means and what our role is in terms of elevating those voices and bringing more visibility to the work that we're doing, and also get Jimmy's take on a lens into the future. So how you ended up starting Wikipedia and what it means in terms of bringing visibility to different voices and to topics and areas of interest for the broader community.
Sure. So I started Wikipedia just over 20 years ago now, back in 2001. Actually, it's nearly 21 years because it was January 15th, 2001. And the original vision for Wikipedia is to have a free encyclopedia for every single person on the planet in their own language. And that's what we're doing at Wikipedia. The concept of Wikipedia from the very beginning has been truly global, truly international. We want an encyclopedia for everyone on the planet. In terms of the Spanish language Wikipedia, of particular interest to this group, it's been with us from very, very early on. It's one of the largest languages of Wikipedia. But our view is Wikipedia is never finished. There's always more work to do, and there's always ways to improve, and that's really kind of what we're all about.
Yeah, when you think about inclusivity, I don't know that it gets much more inclusive than Wikipedia. It seems like every time I Google something, you all are the first to pop up and frankly, a reliable source of information. However, when it comes to the Hispanic community, what does this mean? We talk about red links, heard the term before, but can you explain a little bit about what they are and what it means specifically to this community?
Sure. So when you're writing in Wikipedia, if you're writing about, I don't know, let's say, the United States, and you want to link to New York. Well, if we don't have an entry on New York, obviously we do by now, then if we link to something but we don't have an entry yet, then instead of turning blue, that link shows up as red, so that the other editors and readers can say, oh, here's something that someone wanted to link to for a further explanation, but it's not there yet. So red links for us just means entries we would like to have, but we don't have yet. And so we have various community groups. One of the great community groups within the Wikipedia world is called Women in Red. And this is a group of people who specifically look for women who should be in Wikipedia but who aren't. Women scientists, women politicians, et cetera, et cetera. And so for us, this concept of filling in red links is really important. It's really a big part of what we do. It's one thing to say, okay, well, we've got an entry about New York State. How do we make it better? Well, that's good. We should do that. But actually, possibly more interesting and more fun, I think, for people new to the project to say, oh, well, what hasn't been covered? What are the things that could be covered but that aren't?
Well, there are no greater experts on the Hispanic community than Hispanics themselves. But what does that process even look like? If somebody wants to cover a topic that they know quite a bit about, how do they go about doing that?
So I think it's so. What's interesting about Wikipedia is we have a lot of rules. There's a lot of sort of details about how you should write a Wikipedia entry, but we also have one of our most sort of oddest rules is ignore all rules, which is slightly tongue-in-cheek because you shouldn't just ignore all the rules, really. But the point is, really, you shouldn't have to study hundreds of pages of guidelines before getting started. And most of the rules of Wikipedia are pretty much, I would almost call them kindergarten ethics, like everybody understands already. You can't just come and write random opinions. That's not what Wikipedia is about. You need a source. Your sourcing needs to be quality. So magazines and things like that. So a great source, for Hispanics in the US, for example, would be, Hispanic magazines, newspapers, things like that. There are sources out there. I was just looking before we got on the call. If you just search in a search engine for Wiki Project Hispanic, you'll find what's actually called Wiki Project United States / Hispanic and Latino Americans Task Force. And so this is an active group. And if you go on there, you'll see what they're working on, and you can go to the talk page, and there's just discussions. There's things going on. There's Hispanic Heritage Month edit-a-thon and things like that. So that's actually a great place to get started. You can just pop on there and say, hey, I'm really interested in whatever it is you might be interested in. It might be, Hispanic scientists. It might be Hispanic business leaders. It could be, the history of migration in the United States and how there is a strong Hispanic component to that. And just say to those people, hey, I'm new. I don't really know what I want to do, or I do know what I want to do, but I want to make sure I'm getting good guidance and help. And they'll help you. And they'll say, okay, right, great. Here's a couple of things to read. And why don't you go and write something and then let us review it, and we'll give you tips and pointers. And that kind of positive approach is what's really, really effective at Wikipedia.
So, Jimmy, what are some of the ways that you've seen communities organize to put a lot of information on there at scale? And this might be a good time, too, to talk about, heard rumblings about a Wikiathon in the works. And so if there's anything you want to share around that as well.
Yeah, so one of the things that we do from time to time is we have what's called an edit-a-thon. And these are typically in-person event, but you can do a remote one. And the idea of an edit-a-thon is to set aside a particular block of time. And in an in-person event, obviously we don't live in an era when in-person events are all that easy to do. What typically happens is a handful of really experienced Wikipedians will be there. They'll make a few speeches and sort of start a little bit of lecturing, explaining how Wikipedia works, how to get involved. And then people dig in and they start writing entries, and the Wikipedians go around and sort of give pointers and tips and discussions. And, the idea is to try to bring new people into the community and make them feel welcome and so forth. Obviously, when we do it more remote, then it's a different feel and so forth. But the idea is still, just to have a very set period of time and a particular project at hand. So, the kinds of things that I always would recommend to people is, have a list to work from. So, for example, if a magazine were to publish a list of, 100 up and coming 40 under 40 Hispanic leaders, okay, wow, there's a great list. They've gotten some recognition from a magazine. Actually, when you dig in, you might find, well, some of them, there's not really enough information for a biography, so they're not necessarily the right people for a Wikipedia entry, but a lot of them will be. And so you won't necessarily set your goal to get every single one of them, but you'll set your goal to say, wow, let's get as many of these as we can, people who aren't in Wikipedia and should be. And having a list like that means you get a sense of accomplishment. You've got a set goal. It's not a vague thing. I find that really vague things like, oh, let's increase the coverage of Hispanic things in Wikipedia. Okay, yeah, that's a great thing, but it's hard to work towards an sort of measured goal.
What does it mean to have coverage on Wikipedia? What are the benefits that you've seen from people that have really great Wikipedia profiles, or from communities that are well covered?
Well,
What
I
is the
mean,
impact of that?
it's tricky. I mean, I think the benefits are obvious, but it actually gives rise to a certain kind of problem, which is a lot of people really want to be in Wikipedia, and maybe they shouldn't be in Wikipedia. And so that can give rise to a lot of tension. So people shouldn't approach this, particularly regarding themselves, as here's a way to promote an agenda. Because if you come with that approach, you're probably going to end up in conflict with people. You're going to end up writing things that are biased. You're going to end up possibly a bit disappointed, because you shouldn't be thinking about what are the benefits to our group. You should be thinking about how do we make Wikipedia better, and so that's sort of key. But I mean, obviously, it's very beneficial to everyone. If Wikipedia is comprehensive, then anything anybody wants to know should be there.
So you have built this amazing technology platform that has informed the world many times over on lots of different things. What is your look at the future of technology and the role that it plays in various areas? Where are you focused looking forward?
No, I mean, yeah, it's a very broad question. I'm focused. I focus a lot of my attention these days. I'm very concerned about the rise of disinformation and misinformation online. I have a view which is not necessarily unusual. I think many people have come to this view, which is that the advertising only business model of social networking has given rise to some problems. One of the things that is really a double-edged sword is the programmatic advertising. So this is the advertising that finds you online, tracks your behavior and shows you, things that are more accurate to you. Because of all the criticism these days, we forget that's actually not inherently a bad thing. It's great. If I see ads that are actually relevant to me, that means they're more useful to me. That means they're more useful to the advertisers because they're talking to the right person, rather than just wasting money, which means publishers make more, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of good about it. The problem is, what it means is that every piece of content, every web page is equally competing with every other web page. And it becomes a race just to get attention. It means that social media has incentives to just keep you clicking, keep you looking at as many ads as possible. And I'm not against advertising as a business model. It's just there is a problem right now. So I have a pilot project called WikiTribune Social, or WT.social. It's a new kind of social network with no ads and no paywalls. And the idea is to say, let's get a community together. Let's think about, let's explore, let's improve the software over time. Let's figure out some new models of social networking that are, still engaging. You don't want to optimize for keeping people addicted on the site. Still, it's got to be interesting. But where we really focus on how do we get the best people in the community to be the leaders in curating interesting and valuable content, rather than just whatever gets the most clicks. So that's what I'm spending a lot of time on these days.
Yeah, what do you see in terms of as everybody in this audience is thinking about what's next for them and the role that they play in shaping a lot of these technologies? Are there things that they should have their eye out on, or the things that they should be participating in or supporting to help promote that?
I do think that people in business should be keeping a very close eye on developments in AI. I think it's very interesting what's going on. There's been a lot of progress really quickly. How does that impact business? Well, that really, really depends on what you're doing. In some fields, it won't have much impact at all. In other fields, it's going to be transformative. And so everybody needs to try to have a bit of understanding. Obviously, there's an enormous amount of buzz around crypto these days, so cryptocurrencies, but not just cryptocurrencies. There's Web3, there's NFTs, there's a lot of interesting stuff. I personally have become really interested in the Web3 stuff, which is basically the idea. This is my summary of a wide range of sort of a messy bunch of ideas, but the idea that you could have your money in a wallet on your computer, or preferably on a device that you connect to your computer, and you can pay websites directly without going through credit cards, without going through PayPal. And that currency today might be Bitcoin or Ethereum, but I'm not even sure Bitcoin or Ethereum is the answer. It's really like stable coins, so US dollar coin. So you've got a wallet on your computer that has $100 in it. and you can just send it to a website. Now, right now, that's the technology is being built. It's actually far too expensive right now to really do small transactions on the blockchain.
Yeah, great advice. It's a world I'm learning quite a bit about myself these days. So, as we close out, one of my favorite questions for everybody that I ever talk to is, what is your best advice for the leaders that are here today? Whether either something you've heard or learned along your own journey.
Of trying experiments. Don't sort of, if you think you want to sort of achieve something or do something, don't just sit and dream up the whole big complicated thing to start with. Make a small experiment and just test it, and see, is this going to work? Will I like this, or so forth. I applied this to my own life just today. I thought I just tested COVID positive. I apologize to everyone. I was going to be there in person, and just as I was getting ready for my flight to the U.S., I got a positive COVID test. Fortunately, I have absolutely no symptoms. I'm completely asymptomatic, so I test every day. I'm still positive. It's very annoying. I'm stuck at home. And I thought, you know what? I would really like to be more fit. I'd like to exercise. And I thought I should just get on YouTube and watch some videos. And then I felt very exhausted. And I thought, you know what? I found one. It was 10 minutes long. I'll just try it. I'll do 10 minutes of exercise today. Did it just before we got on, took a shower, and here we are. But that's a silly example, but it is like, instead of working out a huge, enormous plan to become a more fit person and exercise and all that sort of New Year's resolution-y kind of stuff, which we always fail at, I'm just going to try a little bit. And it was easy. I did 10 minutes. Tomorrow I'll do 11.
Well, I love that. And a reminder to all of us to take a small step towards helping to build up the Hispanic community on Wikipedia, to removing some of those red links. Let's all start with one red link that we can remove and help to build up our voice of all these Hispanic stars online. Well, thank you, Jimmy. Thanks for being here today. I'm glad to hear that you're feeling well, and wish you great health very soon.
Fine, so
and thanks for joining us.
3 doses of vaccine. That's my recommendation to everybody.
Our values unite us. Yes, one of the things that all Latinos have in common is how hardworking we are, how optimistic we are, how ambitious we are, how much we care for each other, care over our families and friends, how much we're inclusive with each other. So that's why I was pleasantly not surprised when our latest research showed that Latino children are the most inclusive and altruistic of all children in America. Yes, I am glad to present to you the latest study from the University of Washington Institute of Learning and Brain Studies. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Andrew Meltzoff from the University of Washington. I co-direct the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences. At our institute, we study the brain development of children. We also study the advantages of bilingual and bicultural upbringing, and we study moral development in children. We just completed several scientific studies on the origins of moral development and cooperation. We wanted to show how family upbringing shaped a young child's commitment to sharing, caring, and helping others. To do this, we invited 18-month-olds into our laboratory and gave them a special task in which they could either help or not help an adult. What we found was fascinating. We found that children with Hispanic parents and also those with Asian parents did better on this task than other children. This was surprising because although you might think that Hispanic family values for cooperation have influenced first grade kids, you might not know that this has already begun to influence infants, even those too young to say their first sentences. The news of this scientific finding that Hispanic babies had superior helping and sharing skills was rapidly picked up in the scientific community and the popular press. Everyone wanted to know how infants this young, before formal instruction, could have caught the values of their parents. Now, the person who did this research, the scientist who actually sat nose to nose with the babies, is Dr. Rodolfo Barragan. He himself is of Hispanic heritage. He received his PhD from Stanford and came to my laboratory at the University of Washington to work specifically with young children. I would like him to explain his excitement about this work for himself. So let me introduce Dr. Rodolfo Cortez Barragan to give you a 5-minute description of the work.
Hello, my name is Rodolfo Cortez Barragan from the University of Washington. I am a postdoctoral fellow working with Professor Meltzoff, whom you've just heard from. I'd like to talk with you a bit more about the details of our research with young children, in which we uncovered hidden strengths in young Hispanic children. Strengths that can help us to understand the modern Hispanic American family, and which suggest what everyone can learn from Hispanic parenting. In our study, we recruited about 200 19-month-old infants to come into our university developmental psychology laboratory. Then the infants were shown valuable items. What do we mean by this? What could a 19-month-old possibly value? In our initial study, we showed the infants fruit. For example, delicious bananas and also other sweet fruit like blueberries. What we did next was to do one of two things. Either we accidentally dropped these valuable items and reached out for them as if wanting them back, or acted like we didn't care about the fallen fruit and had no desire for it. The study was carefully designed so that the delicious fruit landed right in front of the infant. This is a really important challenge for a 19-month-old. Will they help the person to retrieve the valuable items or not? We found not only that infants pick up these valuable items, edible items, and hand them to us, but in a second study, we also found that they did that same handing off right before their usual snack time. Even though they were clearly hungry, they still chose to help the other person and to return the fruit to them. In follow-up studies, we wondered, do infants even give this stranger their own favorite toy? Indeed, we collaborated with parents to show the infants their most precious items brought from home. And we found that infants continued to give us these items, which belonged to them, despite the fact that they were reaching for these items just moments before, as if wanting to possess them. One of the most striking findings from these studies is that there was a particular group of infants who helped the most. Infants from Hispanic American families, as well as those from Asian families. These infants helped twice as much. We were very intrigued by these findings. Although work in social and cultural psychology had suggested that Hispanics basically exude niceness, we were surprised to see this in such young children. Already by 19 months, Hispanic children seemed to be more generous than children of other backgrounds. How could this possibly happen? And what could it teach parents, teachers, and leaders? It turns out that Hispanic families emphasize certain values that other cultures emphasize to a lesser extent. For example, the value of ser acomedido, to be attentive to others' needs and to help without being asked, as well as the value of ser simpático, to be agreeable and hospitable. These values can even be seen in the connotation of words. Think of the word education. In English, when we say someone has a good education, what we mean is that they have done well in school. But in Spanish, to say someone has educación means that you are qualifying them as having a good moral education, a moral foundation. That is, in the Spanish language, the heart of education is morality, learning to become a good person. Put another way, here is what a Hispanic mother whose child was in our study and gave away her favorite teddy bear said when the study was covered by Good Morning America.
Maya Rosich took part in the study, handing over her treasured panda bear when the researcher dropped it. Maya's mom says fostering generosity in her daughter is part of their heritage.
In Hispanic culture, there is a lot of pressure to share. The idea is that you're always kind of being as welcoming as you can.
So this means that with the help of their family, these values are already becoming expressed before the child can form complete sentences. This shows hidden strengths in Hispanic parenting and suggests ways that we can all learn from this underrepresented group. More generally, specific aspects of Hispanic parenting may help Hispanic children to become engaged in a positive way with others and to create and deliver value to the world more broadly. This is a very promising avenue for future research with considerable implications for society and policy. Thank you all for your attention.
Hi, I want to close by saying two short messages, one scientific and the other more practical. The scientific message is this: our babies are watching and listening to us, whether we know it or not. They are learning all the time. And they not only learn languages such as Spanish and English, and mental skills such as how to solve puzzles, stack blocks, and how to use the remote control. They are also learning how to cooperate with others, how to care, how to share. They are learning these lifelong social skills in part by watching us and how we treat other people. The more practical message is this: Dr. Barragan and I are now working on new educational programs to try to capture the secret sauce of Hispanic family values to see if we can assist other children from other backgrounds to acquire the sense of generosity, sharing, and caring that Hispanic kids show by 18 months of age. Dr. Barragan and I think that when this story gets out, that designers of preschools around the country are going to want to be more respectful and inclusive of Hispanic culture. After all, a universal hope of most parents, whether Black, white, or brown, is that their children grow up to be caring and sharing. It turns out that one of the best ways of achieving this is to adopt the socialization practices that are already used by Hispanic parents and grandparents. We can't wait to disseminate the news that having Hispanic kids in classrooms and Hispanic values in the air will help all our children. Perhaps one small way that we can reduce prejudice is to show non-Hispanic parents that they can help their own kids become more generous and caring if they expose them to Hispanic values. All of us in American society and around the world really can learn from Hispanic culture that education starts in the home with moral values, and that our children at first learn from watching us. It's our privilege and responsibility to teach our children. It is our obligation to improve civilization, one child at a time. Our message is that this teaching and learning does not start in first grade. It starts by how we raise our little infants. To conclude, we are all human and we can learn from each other. Nothing could be more important for the future of human civilization than to teach our youngest children to be sharing, caring, empathetic, and cooperative with others. This provides the basic moral foundation of civilization, and without moral values like those in Hispanic culture, civilization simply begins to break down. So our future truly does start with the children. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Claudia, and everyone at the We Are All Human Foundation. And hello to all of you. My name is Elisa Villanueva Beard. I am the proud CEO of Teach for America, and I am honored to be a co-chair of this summit. My co-chairs and all of you here today and our Hispanic communities across the country everywhere are a deep source of inspiration for me and a deep source of talent and leadership for our country. We are diverse in every way. We are resilient through every challenge, and our potential to change the world is limitless. That is what we do know about our community. And as we all know, we are in a pivotal moment for our country and really the world. We are facing so many pressing issues, whether we look at this global pandemic, a fragile democracy, long-standing racial injustice, a climate change crisis, and growing global economic inequality, and so much more. And what we can all agree on is that none of that can be taken on without ensuring that every child has access to an excellent and equitable education in our country. It is foundational to a strong community, society, and country. Providing that education has always been a challenge. And the pandemic showed everyone who didn't already know that our education system is outmoded and inequitable how much work we have to do. The skills that our children need today to be competitive and to fully contribute, we know are so different than what we needed even 10 or 15 years ago. We are living in the information age, and yet our system is stuck in the industrial age. And our education system must exist to serve every single child, no matter their background. According to some estimates, 65% of students that are in grade school right now will be tasked with finding a job that doesn't even exist yet. So we need to ensure that our educators and our children, our young people, are being prepared to be competitive in this kind of environment. Skills like STEM are essential. Digital literacy, computational thinking, computer science. And yet what is true today is that 41% of schools serving low-income communities offer foundational computer science, only 41%. The pace of change deeply impacts our Hispanic communities because a third of our population is under the age of 18. And what is also that our fourth grade reading and math proficiency rates are respectively 12 and 13 points lower than the average fourth graders overall in this country. And for kids growing up in low-income communities, research tells us very clearly that education matters for economic mobility more than any other observable factor. I believe that now is the time for us to reconsider what education is, what workforce development is. Educational approaches to the workforce development have historically been limited to focusing on skills and training for adults. But workforce development actually begins in K-12 learning. We can and we must create pathways and supports for students and educators starting from the earliest years through college graduation and into that very first job. And while many of the jobs of the future are uncertain and are unknown, what we do know is that whatever our children go on to do and whatever dreams that they have, schools must be a place where they are teaching our children how to critically think, how to develop their interpersonal skills, where they are developing self-awareness, empathy, and creativity, and where they are learning how to work across all lines of difference. We know these are often called soft skills, They are essential. They are essential right now in the workplace, and they're only going to become more so in the years to come. I am thrilled to be working alongside all of you toward our shared vision for the future of our communities. Every child, no matter their zip code, deserves access to an education that will spark their aspirations, equip them to have choices in life, and prepare them for the 21st century. Together, let's continue to change the structures and the systems that hold our students back. Let's continue to listen to our students and center their experience in the solutions that we pursue. And let's continue to lead with them and with our communities. If we do that, we'll equip our children today with the mindsets and skills they need to change the world.
This is a breakthrough initiative and one of the most important announcements that I can even imagine being making. We are launching Hispanic Star children's books, a series that I'm proud to be co-authoring with a number of other authors, Latino authors, that are going to bring role models to our children, that are going to allow for that 77% of Latinos that are not aware of their own contributions to go down, because we're going to go straight into the formative years in bringing children something that they don't have, bios, little bios that allow them to understand of our heroes in sports, in mining, in business, in music. And I'm very proud to be partnering with Macmillan, one of the most important publishing houses that are going to be authoring and publishing these books. The dream is to have every Latino kid to be able to have in their hands this little series of children's books. So I am counting on everyone to be able to get excited about this idea, buy, distribute, promote, so that we can have every one of our children having in their hands heroes through our Hispanic Star children's books. With that, I would like to introduce my colleagues from Macmillan, John and Marielle. And here I'm going to pass on the baton with an incredible sentiment of gratitude for you, John Jagged, President Director of Macmillan Publishing House, for allowing for this children's book series to be born, and tell us more about it. Why is this important? How did this conversation started? And what is the series book?
Absolutely. And Claudia, thank you so much for having us. We could not be more excited to be part of this announcement. It's about a year ago that we met for the first time with this concept of coming up with a book built around Hispanic stars, and middle grade series featuring icons from the Hispanic and Latin American community. And it was an absolute win from the beginning, from the passion that you had when you first pitched the idea to the notion of teaming you with accelerated collaborators who can bring these books to life and get books in the hands of kids so they can see role models. They could see people that exemplify the wonderful heritage that the Latinx community has in general, but also in the impact it's had in the United States. So it's like, yes, sign me up. How do we do these books? We started talking some more. The idea came. We have 6 books to start. The first ones are coming out next September 6th. We have Celia Cruz and Roberto Clemente. These are going to be great opportunities to have kids. What we talk about a lot, and you and I have talked about this, Claudia, is it's windows and mirrors. Kids need to have mirrors so they can see themselves in the books that they read, but they're also windows in for other communities to come in and help celebrate what's been going on with the Latin American and Hispanic stars that we have in our history. So we're going to start with those 2 books. There'll be 2 books every season after that. So about every 3 or 4 months, there'll be two more books. And we really think this is going to be a great opportunity to celebrate the Latino culture in our world. And also, more importantly, we know that the single most important thing for having kids succeed in life is having access to books at an early age. So with this series, we're going to enable that to happen. Kids are going to see books and want to read them about heroes that look like them, that tell part of the history, and also the history of America as well. And that's why we're so excited about it. So there's one thing to publish the books. There's another is to make sure that they get read and that we promote them. And Mariel runs marketing for us here in McMillan Children's Publishing Group. She's going to tell you a little bit about how we're going to do that.
Hi, everyone. I'm so proud to be here as a Latina and a Latina who's been at Macmillan for 15 years. I've seen the growth and evolution of our culture on America, and it brings me tremendous pride and joy to be able to work on these books to bring them into kids' lives and into the material that they're working with and reading with at schools and in their homes. And in order to do that, it's super important that my team and I work extra hard to bridge the gaps and meet these influencers and educators where they are. So the crux of our campaign is really implementing what Claudia and John spoke about, the importance of kids reading early. So we want to make sure that we're working with librarians, educators, teachers, gatekeepers, even influencers, the unification of Latinos across all different areas of corporations and business so that they can understand that we need to do this together. In marketing, my role is to make impactful messages, but really to find my audiences. It's no mistake that the Hispanic culture is now mainstream in the United States. And these two books, Sports and Music, Roberto Clemente and Celia Cruz, are perfect avenues to reach our children because it's where we're most influential. And then also the authors that we're bringing in to support these books are stars in their own right, and they will help us on their platforms promote our message. We will work directly with teachers and educators. We have an incredible network that we've spent decades building, and we're going to tap into those resources. And now with social media more powerful than ever, we have to work with influencers who can be the people who spread that message and make the books inclusive.
And Mariel, I want you to actually, and I do want to recognize how incredible your leadership, John, is to, like I remember 1 year ago, I came to you and said, 77% of our community does not know of our own contributions to the country. And that is a tragedy because then we don't feel that we're contributors. We don't see ourselves, particularly because the connotations of Latinos in the media and else are so different to our reality. We're stars. We're positive contributors. We need to know how much we've been, making this country beautiful. America's made of stars and Hispanics are one of them. And we really need to educate ourselves. And I see you, I'm so grateful for Macmillan's leadership in taking this series of books, creating these bios. And I want to make sure that we together, here, leaders, Latino leaders together, corporations, individuals, influencers, media, social media, you take this incredible opportunity that we have from Macmillan to make sure that every Latino kid in this country has one of those series of books so that we can be inspiring them from young age.
Completely agree with what you said, but most importantly, let's do this together. Let's be unified in this. We have an opportunity here to really create impactful change and lasting change.
John, Mariel, thank you so very much for this exciting breakthrough idea. 2022, here we come.
Thank you, Claudia.
Gracias, Claudia.
That was great. And remember, September 6th is the date of publishing the first 2 Hispanic star children's books with Roberto Clemente and Celia Cruz. And afterwards, every quarter, the 2 next books. Let's all hold hands so that every one of our Latino children can have heroes in their hands by reading about themselves so that if they can see it, they can be it. Thank you so much.
As you can tell, that is such an exciting idea for me. Hispanic star children's books. Yes, changing our perception from the time in which little minds start becoming big so that we can have our children, every Latino children, having a series of books so that they can see it and they can be it. Recognizing that Hispanics have been contributors to the country all along and that we just need to create those platforms for see it. So I'm excited about that, and I'm really excited as well to the next session. Understanding from leaders on different industries, how do we elevate our Latino voices? How do we do it in creativity festivals? How do we do it in media? How do we do it in digital spaces, how do we actually mobilize everyone so that we can have a proliferation of Latino voices rising up? So welcome to this panel on elevating Latino voices. And let's actually not stop until the job is done. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much. This is an important panel, and I would like to start by recognizing how much visibility Latinos still need to gain, and how do we do it? What are the solutions? What are inspirations that we can have from leaders all across the country and the world about how do we raise Hispanic voices? We are in a crucial moment. We know it. There's a lot of momentum on diversity and inclusion. We have to take the opportunity as Hispanic community to raise our voices. So welcome, panelists. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I would like to start with Tony Marks. Tony, what are things that you think can be done in your industry where we can use, like literature, libraries, authors to elevate Latino voices? Thank you so much for being here, by the way, and being our co-chair for this Hispanic Leadership Summit.
Well, Claudia, it's an honor to be with you, and you do such amazing work, and the summit is so spectacular and so timely. In answer to your question, look, the public libraries of America are the most visited civic institution in the country. That's certainly true in New York as well. There's nobody else even close as an institution. People rely on us for reading, for books, for space, for education programs, and they do so because they know they can trust us. We don't ask for any proof, any papers. Everybody is welcome and everybody is respected. But that's not enough. We need to make sure that our collections have what every community, including the Hispanic community, are looking for, and making sure they're readily available in the neighborhood as well as online. We need to make sure that in the organization, we have positions of leadership that can raise up Hispanic experience and voices, and make sure that our services and collections are what the community need by being a part of that community, talking with that community. I'll give you just one example. When I arrived at the library a decade ago, I learned that here in the research collection, so separate from the circulating branch libraries that everybody knows and loves and uses, but here at the research library, we had one of the world's greatest Latin America collections. And we had, for whatever reasons, never had a single dedicated staff person, a curator for Latin America. That meant that the collection basically was sitting here dormant. There was no one making sure that it kept alive, adding to it, and even more importantly, reaching out to classrooms, to scholars, to students, to the community to say, here's what we have. Let us help you use this amazing set of resources. Thanks to Carlos Rodriguez Pastor, a trustee, we now have a Latin America curator for the first time on the staff of the New York Public Library. She's fantastic. That's just one example of how we need to make even just what we have readily available and used, in addition to making sure that what we have represents the interests of the community.
Thank you. Tony, also, in a way, I've seen a proliferation of authors, African-American authors, like people putting more money in publishing new authors, new voices. I think that if I can look around, I don't see enough children books dedicated to Latinos so that they can have role models. I don't see enough history books about the Hispanic contribution to America historically. When did we start actually bringing agriculture and all that? So just one word of that before
there is amazing material out there, and we need to make sure that we're buying it and lending it and making it readily available for free. But in doing so, we also need to be priming the pump of demand, of saying to the publishing industry, to the author community, where there's amazing talent and interest, we need more of this material, and we're ready to buy it on behalf of the readers of New York.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. Jillian, what about the media? What about the media industry, journalism? Do you see how do we actually elevate more Latino voices, both as journalists and as part of the coverage that is in papers?
I think it's a really interesting question, Claudia. I salute you on holding this summit. As Tony said, it's playing a very important role in raising awareness. I also salute what Tony's doing with the library, because it is indeed a really important pillar of civic society today. There's a really interesting situation right now in the media, which is in the last 2 years, because of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and all the tragedies that have unfolded there, often in full view, or rather in full cable television view and Instagram, there is rightfully a real sense of anger about the underrepresentation of the African American community, and a whole swathe of initiatives right now to try and address that, both in terms of coverage and thinking about what kind of coverage is fair and accurate and actually reflecting the diversity of America, but also in terms of the journalists that are being hired. And, you know, speaking on behalf of the Financial Times, we're doing a lot of initiatives to try and address the diversity inside the FT, and have made a number of hires, which we're very excited about. However, there has been a lot less focus on the Hispanic community, even though, as you yourself have pointed out many times, it's such a massive part of the American fabric, and such a dynamic and underappreciated part of the American fabric. And there aren't the similar kind of, you know, hiring initiatives, pipelines, NGOs, efforts for the Hispanic community in the media. And there certainly isn't the same level of debate underway about, you know, coverage and representation and whether it really reflects fairly what's going on. Why is that? Well, as you've talked about many times, Claudia, you know, the Hispanic community is a very diverse community in itself. You know, there are different stories behind different parts of the Hispanic community. It doesn't always see itself as a single community. You have the added issue that you have a separate channeled Spanish language or Portuguese language part of the media that's serving them, but obviously it then reinforces that sense of separation or creates potential ghettos. So all of that, you know, contributes to the sense of that actually Hispanic issues aren't getting the attention they deserve, and Hispanic reporters aren't necessarily receiving the same level of focus as they might deserve. So it's very important you're putting this on the agenda for discussion. As the composition of America changes and as the dynamism changes as well, it's going to become increasingly stark as an issue. And I simply posit that having more focus on the Hispanic community, looking at diversity in the widest possible sense within the American landscape, might be one way to potentially blur some of the excessively demarcated lines, or the anger, hostility, or feeling of us and them between the African American community and the white community. When you start talking about many different shades of diversity and many different voices that need to be elevated, I think you get a much richer kind of debate, and perhaps a less polarizing one as well.
And Gillian, just to a follow-up question before, again, turning it to Antonio, but you know, like there's a lot of discussion, I think, that among Latino leaders about, like, we are, you know, like it's not about pressure, it's about making the business case and the case, because Latinos are so much the growth. And nevertheless, what are things that we could scale up? What are initiatives that you have seen in the FT that have been, like, is it about scholarships or is it about internships? Where do we actually put some emphasis of what you have experienced that have made your you know, like your publication and others that you have seen more, you know, like more inclusive, both at pipeline level, employee level, but also at the coverage level?
I think there's essentially two things to do. One is to think about the employees we're hiring. Because the issues around the African American representation or underrepresentation have been so stark, and several NGOs have sprung up to specifically get talented young African Americans into the media. And there's a kind of pipeline pattern there. Now, there may be similar groups working in the Hispanic community, but if there are, I've never encountered them, and which speaks volumes, because I certainly had a lot of outreach from African American groups that are doing wonderful work. You know, one of the things that we are discovering is that you don't necessarily, it doesn't work best to operate by simply sitting still and expecting people to come to you. You may have to actually go out and actively find those interns and that pools of talent. It may mean going out to universities, which haven't traditionally been the first destination that journalistic groups have thought about when they've been trying to hire people. You know, get out of the Ivy Leagues, go down to some of the, you know, traditionally African-American colleges, go down and look down south, look at other areas other than just the traditional places that everyone focuses on to get the talent. getting internships and thinking very actively about the economic disparities that often plague interns is incredibly important. And then trying to make sure that you have, a culture inside your organization that tries to be truly colorblind and tries to rise above its prejudices. Last but not least, another lesson you can also learn is from thinking about some of the gender issues as well, because a few years ago at the FT, we created something we called the Janet bot, which was named in honor of Janet Yellen. And it's an AI program that automatically tracks how many pictures of women there are in our website or in our mainstream paper to see how the women to male to female ratio of pictures goes. And to make sure we're not using unconscious biases in the sense of always turning to a male picture when we have a central banking topic. So Janet bot with Janet Yellen. Things like that I know have been used within the African-American issues or debate. Again, it's harder to start talking about pictures and things necessarily within Hispanic, but thinking about how papers are actually covering these issues more systematically and stepping back could be another very interesting potential tool.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Antonio.
Encantado, Claudia. Pleasure to be here with you discussing this very, very, very important topic. As it pertains to the lessons that we've learned in corporate America about diversity and inclusion, pretty much the playbook has been written. The challenge continues to be as something that you and I have talked many times about, the application and the discipline and the focus and the commitment required to the application of that playbook. We know that we need to improve representation. It is bad in terms of the aggregate people of color. It is appalling when it comes to Hispanics. Then we have issues on inclusion as it pertains to building leadership capabilities as opposed to just functional capabilities, creating a sense of community, providing mentoring, and then providing company sponsorship for those candidates. And then we have an issue of measurements, which is at the end of this day, the reason that we're doing what we're doing is because we want to have significantly better business outcomes. And one of the things that we've done right is to identify the number of women and to make all sorts of correlations. And therefore, within the marketing community, you've seen a significant improvement in the number of women in senior marketing roles. For the first time last year, there are more women than men in CMO chairs, and that just happened over a 5-year period. It was measured, it was focused, the commitment was there, and you saw the results. It's not happening with people of color, and it doesn't happen with people of color. First, we aggregate as this blah thing, black, brown, Asians, so on and so forth. And we need to get the same level of rigor and discipline with some of the things that Jillian was talking about. We need to look for talent in different places. And once we have this talent, we really need to nourish this talent through all the different inclusion areas that I mentioned before. One of the things, so that's what corporate America needs to do. One of the things that we need to do as a community, Claudia, and Jillian mentioned it as well, our Black brothers and sisters operate as a block, that our Asian brothers and sisters are becoming to operate as a block. We are typical Latin Americans that like to argue about anything. We're still arguing whether we call ourselves Latinos, Hispanics, or Latinx. We need to come together and begin to lobby it to the same level of extent and pressure that some of the other groups, or we're going to miss the single biggest business opportunity for the next 2 decades, in which the Latino Hispanic population is going to become close to 1/3 of the population. So those are some of the thoughts.
Antonio, stay there for a second. So I would like for all of you to react to each other if you have any reaction. And starting with you, Antonio, just like before reacting to what you heard from Tony and from Jillian, tell me what does success look like for you, like in terms of marketing dollars invested by companies in advertising that is portraying Latinos? How do we actually, what does success look like for you in the next, 3 and then 5 years? And then obviously, I would love to hear your reactions to each other from all of you.
I mean, again, if we take holistic and systemic change, which is what needs to happen within the marketing community, it means teams at the client side that are representatives of the communities that they're going to be serving, which means a significantly higher number of Latinos. That means also at the agency side. That means also at the productions side of it. And then you need to measure whether we are indeed depicting Latinos the right way. And there are all sorts of measurements about it. Sustainable progress across those 4 dimensions is what, for me, success would look like.
I'll jump in. Look, I think my colleagues are absolutely right. We live in New York. We live in New York in the United States. What makes New York the center of the world? Apologies, Jillian.
I'm in New York as well.
I know, but you do represent London.
No, well, I'm in the center right now, so for a reason.
And the reason why we became the center of the world is diversity, is the variety of people who've been welcomed here. It's never been perfect, God knows, but it's been different than the old world, coming from the Dutch tradition in the old world of New Amsterdam. It's why New York is so powerful. And what holds us back, and this is true of the country as well, is we don't use and embrace that difference and really say that difference is our richness. It brings different perspectives, different ideas, different experiences that help us understand each other, help us solve problems. It's the secret of America's success and unlocking it more fully in all the ways that Antonio and Jillian have described is essential, whether that's in terms of staffing selection. Here at the library, we're now using the Rooney Rule, where we won't proceed with an appointment unless we have diversity in the finalist group. We're concerned about the pipeline of getting qualified people up, whether we help that in the regular functions of the library or even in our own page program. We have hundreds of high school and college students, including lots of Hispanics, who are working in our libraries. It's their first job. It becomes a pipeline to careers in the library. 60% of our frontline staff come from this program. We've now invested in making it larger. We need more Hispanic presence there. We need it to be a full pipeline into not just careers in the library, but elsewhere, whether it's in administration, fundraising, finance, whatever it is. And then lastly, because we're a library, we need to make sure that our content reflects that diversity, is available both physically and online. And we know that not all communities are as online as they need to be. We need to help solve that problem as well. We need to get everybody on broadband so that everyone can get access to the content to learn about the Hispanic community, about each other. That's our bread and butter, and we need to do better at that as well. The one thing we can't do is just sit around and rhetoricize. We don't have time for that anymore. And I think everybody understands that we, including leaders of institutions, need to be held to a higher, tougher standard because we haven't done well enough. Library has been a leader, and it's still not good enough.
Jillian?
Well, I think that Tony's being a bit modest there, because I think that, he certainly has been at the forefront of a lot of attempts to try and think about how, different groups are presented and portrayed. And, what happens in literature, what happens in libraries is a very powerful bellwether for the way that the wider conversation in society is happening. And I'll also just give a shout out for the work that the New York Public Library is doing in terms of trying to take digital connections, Wi-Fi, digitization out to a wider group of people, because again, that's part of pulling different diverse groups into the conversation. But I very, very strongly echo what Antonio said about the lack of a coordinated voice, about the lack of visibility, about the dangers of the Hispanic community going into ghettos and not engaging with the mainstream sometimes. And would simply say that, it's going to take a lot of leaders not merely rising up to the ranks of companies and political structures and civic institutions, but doing so with a proud Hispanic message. It's going to require a lot of that to actually get the conversation to change, because Another thing that's striking is that there are a number of Hispanic leaders out there, not many, but there are a number in business, say, in contrast to the African American community, who always carry their African American identity with them when they're interviewed or talked about, and are often presented as somebody who represents the community, sometimes unfairly, but they're always seen within that frame, and they always have that demonstration effect, if you like, about what's possible. We see far less of that in the Hispanic community. And so I guess one of the things I would call on is for the community to give the journalists and the media great stories to write about too.
Yeah, I could not agree more with both. What I like about what Tony said is at the end of the day, this is not about the beautiful panels like what we're doing right now, but it's about very specific actions. This is about change management. When you're talking about corporate structure, it is about setting very specific objectives with very specific strategies, with very specific plans of actions that are going to be measured, and then they're going to be adjusted according to those particular efforts. If the words are not translated into holistic systemic change management, we're going to continue to have these conversations for the next decade, and frankly, I don't have that time anymore. And going to what Gillian was saying, we need to actually tell more of our stories. One of the things that for many years we fought in corporate America are some Hispanics that will not acknowledge that they are Hispanic, because there's been so much prejudice within the corporate structure that it was better for them just to keep it quiet, or are still quiet, and they don't participate in some of the activities. That's real. There's nothing, that is real. So the telling of the stories, embracing our Hispanic nature, and I thought the example is perfect, like some of our Black brothers and sisters are doing, is really, really important. I think it's more important than ever, together with all the cultural transformational change that we need to make at the different organizations.
And the way I say it, Claudia, because unfortunately I'm going to have to go in a minute, but I'd say, where is the Hispanic equivalent of Ken Chernow, formerly of American Express, Ken Frazier, or Ursula Burns? Where is that today? Because, we would love to be celebrating that and talking about it much more forcefully.
Right. And so I exactly, and that's part of, and that is part of what we're trying to do. We're trying, as We're All Human, to provide a framework with Hispanic stars to unify Latinos, as Antonio was saying, act as a block, but also to change our perception. And needless to say, I'm after your industries. I'm totally after the media industry covering us, more after CMOs saying like we're investing more after authors and libraries and people like you. So my last question to all of you would be, if I would be you and you would be me, what would you think you would be asking from me? If I would be Tony Marks leading the New York Public Library and you would be an activist for the Latino community on unification and change of perception, what do you think is the right ask and the right tone? What would you do if you would be someone like me devoted to advancing Latinos and changing our perception, please?
Well, we are eager to partner. We are a part of this community and in every community. I mean, I think we should get real and say, let's agree on some metrics and some goals and be precise and say, let's make sure that we have collections that reflect the Hispanic community, that they are circulating in those communities, that's happening online and offline, that the education programs, after school, homework help, English language, we have the biggest English language instruction outside of the schools for free. Is that all working? And is the organization reflecting this in terms of its appointments, its staffing, all of that? I think we should be held to, fairly tight standards. We are trying to do that for ourselves. We should be public about that and judged on the results. Yes, we have done amazing work. But even an institution that is committed to that amazing work, I think the point is that even that kind of an institution, even the library, can still do better. And this is the time when we all need to hold ourselves to account.
So I could say, as a public library, we will go and try to find the next 10 Latino authors and exemplify them and bring their books forward and try to push more publishers to actually publish more Latino children books and other.
Fabulous. Let's do it.
I would say from my point of view, 3 quick things. One is I'd encourage media organizations to try and track this and actually look at it. First thing is to actually ask questions about what is the representation or the composition of journalists, if you can measure it. Doing that in relation to women and men has been very, very, has illuminated a lot and forced change. Second point is to talk about the composition of stories and to think about whether stories are being represented fairly or not. And the third thing is to, really try and get the message out and encourage, as Antonio said so forcefully, the Latino community to not only stick together, but to celebrate its triumphs and successes, because we just don't hear enough about that.
Yeah, Claudia, the one thing that you can do better than anyone is the power of convening. And if there's someone that can help us come together, bring people like Sol Trujillo, who's been an icon of the business community for many, many, many years, to actually begin to advocate in a more sort of consistent and focused way across the multiple dimensions, government, corporate, communities, the press, I think that would be a major, major step forward. And I would be happy to support it.
Well, I want to thank you, and I want to invite you, and I will convene you to join forces next Hispanic Heritage Month. I think it's a great opportunity to really break through the noise. I want to thank you, allies, particularly for being part of this journey. Tony, Marx, Gillian, Ted, Antonio, Lucio, thank you so much for your leadership, for being here. Thank you for the tips in raising Hispanic voices. I hope that next year we can see a difference, the way that we started seeing a difference this year already. I see more noise, I see more traction. So thanks to people like you and your leadership, we will continue going.